Piracy. Video game piracy. What is this piracy? Is stealing a car piracy? Does someone need to get on a ship to become a pirate? And who are these hackers that crack video games? How do they do it? Do they hit the game really hard until it actually cracks? What is Denuvo? And who is Empress? And why do they hate each other? And if buying isn't owning, then is piracy really stealing? The history of video game piracy is actually really interesting. From the early days of 1980s to the modern days of 2024, video games have come a long way. And so is the piracy. In the recent times, if you have ever visited any video game subreddit or opened the comment section of any Ubisoft social media post, then you probably would have seen this one quotation being thrown around. If buying isn't owning, then piracy isn't stealing. But why? Well, one of the Ubisoft executives once made a comment saying that gamers need to get comfortable not owning their games. And this is kinda where this whole thing started. So it's basically like you will own nothing and be happy. And now I know some of you might think, wait, what? What does it even mean by buying isn't owning? If I paid for a game, that means I own it, right? I can play it anytime I want, right? No. You see, this whole concept of not owning video games is not something new. Anytime you are paying to buy a game, you're not actually buying the game itself, you're just buying the license to play that game. Which means if the people behind the game suddenly decide that they don't want to support the game anymore, then they can simply take the game away from you. And you won't be able to do anything. And it's not just about taking away the games, like for example in future, for some reason if the Steam servers gets offline, or if someone hacks into your account, or if your account gets banned for some stupid reason, then that also means your entire gaming library is now gone. And we have seen this type of things happen over and over again. So now the question is, how can someone actually permanently own a game? You know, like they can play anytime they want without any limitations. They can even share that game with their friends, and they don't even need to connect to the internet to play that game. How can one do it? Come on, say it with me. I think we both know what I'm trying to say. Come on, let's say it together. 3, 2, 1. Piracy. Physical media. What? You thought I was gonna say piracy, didn't you? Physical media is one of the few ways in which you can own a game for a really long time. You can play offline, you can share it with your friends, heck, you can even sell it if you want. You can basically do whatever you want. Just don't eat it. But even physical games also have their limitations. Like for example, you can't just put a PS3 disc in a PS4 and expect it to work. You are always limited by the hardware. So then, what's the other option? Piracy. Over the years, people have slowly realized that piracy is one of the very few ways in which you can preserve a game for basically forever. I mean, just think about it. There are so many older games that are just not available anymore on any online stores, mainly because they got delisted for licensing issues. Or think about games from older console generations, which never got ported to newer hardware. So those games are also basically gone with those older consoles. The only way to replay those older games is through emulation, which I agree is not technically piracy, but downloading the ISO file of that game from any third-party website is piracy. So the question is, what is the problem? Well, now the problem with piracy is, you see, it's kinda illegal. And the developers who work really hard to make a game wouldn't exactly want pirates to download and play that game for free without even paying. I mean, the developers do deserve to get paid. A game literally takes years to develop. So over the years, developers have used different kind of protection systems to protect their games from being pirated. But what fascinates me is that no matter how strong the protection system is, the hackers have always found out some really interesting and creative way to bypass those protection systems and crack the video games. Now of course, piracy is illegal, and in itself it is also a really controversial topic to talk about. But what I feel like is the piracy lore is so rich and filled with so many interesting moments and events and so many interesting stories that everyone should know about it. This war between these protection systems and the hackers who crack the systems, it's been going on for years. And it's a story that I feel like everyone needs to know. And that is what we are gonna talk about in this video. The history of video game piracy. How it started, who are the people behind the hacking, how they crack the games, how it gets distributed among the pirates, what is repacking, who is Empress, what is the Warez Scene, and basically all the drama, the plot twist, and the entire timeline between 1980 to 2024. The entire video game piracy lore. So sit back, relax, take a deep breath, maybe grab some drinks and some snacks, cause this one's gonna be a long one. But before that, disclaimer. This video is for educational purposes only. I'm not promoting piracy and I'm also not asking you guys to pirate video games. Piracy is illegal and very dangerous. And if you try to pirate something without proper knowledge, then you can end up damaging your computer, accidentally install viruses, and your personal private data could get stolen. All the information that I am going to present to you in this video is based on actual data that's available on the internet. And again, this video is for educational purposes only. I'm not trying to promote piracy, and I would also recommend you guys to not visit any shady websites without proper knowledge. Be very careful, don't do anything stupid. Now with that out of the way, let's continue. So, first of all, what is video game piracy? Well, according to Wikipedia, video game piracy is the unauthorized copying and distributing of video game software and is a form of copyright infringement. So basically, in simple terms, when someone illegally downloads a video game from any third-party website or torrent without actually paying for the game, or even when someone makes a bunch of copies of a game and then distributes it to other people without any actual authorization, then that is known as video game piracy. Because in both of these scenarios, the actual developers of the game are not getting paid. The piracy of video games began between late 1970s to early 1980s with the rise of personal computers. People would copy their games onto floppy disks and cassette players and then either share them locally or share them digitally through BBS, which is short for Bulletin Board System. Now, in case you don't know what BBS is, it's basically the earliest version of the internet. To access BBS or Bulletin Board System, people would connect both their PC and their telephone with a modem. And once everything was connected and working, people could connect with other BBS users and share text messages and files with them. And it was not just limited to one person. Multiple people around the world could connect to the same host, and then they could text with each other, share different files, or share pirated video games. Now, to prevent this, developers started using different types of protection methods. Physical copies of games started coming with different types of codes written in the box, and you had to enter those codes to play those games. Some games even came with different types of cipher wheels or decoders, like for example, there was a game called The Secret of the Monkey Island that came with a cipher wheel, and players had to use that wheel to answer certain questions in the game. And because of this, if someone was using a pirated copy of that game, then they won't be able to play it because they wouldn't have that cipher wheel with them. Now, this type of protection did actually stop the average normal people from copying and sharing the games. But this did not stop the actual hackers. You see, with the rise of BBS also came the Warez Scene, or in short, the Scene. The Scene is a huge worldwide underground network of hacking groups that specialize in illegally releasing digital media like movies and music and video games. Their whole purpose is to release pirated copies of various digital contents, including, you guessed it, cracked video games. Now, the Scene doesn't actually have any leader. What they have is a few sets of rules that every group must follow. Anytime a group would release a crack, it needs to follow a certain set of rules and requirements. And if any group for some reason would disobey these rules, then the other groups would just nuke them. Or in simple words, they would blacklist them and consider their releases faulty and invalid. And it will also ruin that group's reputation. And that is a big deal. You see, in the Scene, these groups don't work for money or charity. For them, it's all about competition and reputation. Anytime a new game gets released, it also starts a race among all the groups on who can crack it first, and whichever group cracks it first will get all the glory and the reputation, and their crack will be considered as the final version. Any crack of that same game that gets released after that by any other group will simply be considered unworthy, and it will get nuked. When any group would crack a game, they would add a custom intro in the game files, which is also known as cracktro. So every time you boot the game, the cracker group's logo will appear for a few seconds. And with that, they would also add an NFO file with each crack, which is kind of a text file where they would add some sort of text message for other groups, or the game developers, or even the other pirates. This is the whole point of the scene. They don't crack games to earn money, and they don't do it for the charity either. They only do it for the competition and the reputation. These people who crack the games are not like the hackers we see in the movies, wearing a hoodie and an anonymous mask, working in a dark room, fighting against some big corporation. These hackers are not actually like that. These people also have a normal life, a normal family, and a day job. Or at least most of them. Most of them are not cracking games to fight against some big corporation or to help the pirates play free games. They are not some kind of Robin Hood. They're mainly doing it for the competition, to see who is the best. That is their whole motivation. A lot of these groups themselves have claimed in their NFO files that they do not support piracy, and they also request the other pirates to buy these games if they could. The group Deviants in their Call of Duty 2 NFO said,
"We do this just for fun. We are against any profit or commercialization of piracy. We do not spread any release, others do that. In fact, we buy all our own games with our own hard-earned and worked for efforts, which is from our own real-life non-scene jobs. As we love game originals, nothing beats a quality original. Support the software companies. If you play this game, buy it. We did."
Over the years, there's been a bunch of different groups that came into existence in the Warez scene. Now, even though most of the groups are anonymous and there's not a lot of accurate data available about them on the internet, but the earliest group that I could find was Razor 1911 that was founded in 1985 in Norway. Then there was Fairlight or FLT, which was founded around 1987. After that, there was a group named Paradox, founded around 1989. Then there was Skid Row, founded around 1990, Deviants 1998, Conspiracy or CPY, an Italian group founded around 1999, Reloaded, founded around 2004, then there was Codex around 2014, Steampunks around 2017. Now of course these are some of the most popular groups that I could find on the internet with somewhat an accurate origin date. These groups existed for a longer period of time and released a lot of cracked games. But even other than this, there's been lots and lots of other groups that came into existence in between this timeline. But most of these groups either existed for a shorter amount of time, or there's just not a lot of data available about them on the internet. Or at least I couldn't find any. According to Wikipedia, there were around 3,164 active groups within the Warez scene between 2003 and 2009. Although majority of these groups were active for no more than 2 to 3 months, and with only a small fraction being active for many years. That's a lot of groups! This is a common pattern in the Warez scene. Even though a lot of groups gets created, most of them just stop existing after a few months. There's only ever been a few groups that stayed consistent for a really long time. Every time a new game got released, these hacking groups would rush to crack it, and eventually those cracks would reach the other pirates. And it was becoming a problem for the developers and all the people who made the game, because it was hurting the game's sales. Now, as I said before, in the early days, games started to come with key codes in the manuals, and you needed to enter those codes to play that particular game. But this did not stop the hackers from cracking it. What they actually did was modify the exe file in a way that it would just not ask for the code. They would literally remove that part which asked for the code. So the cracked game would just run normally without any issues. So what happened was that games were still getting cracked and copied and then shared among other pirates. Now to prevent this, developers started using a DRM known as SafeDisk is a DRM copy protection system. DRM is short for Digital Rights Management. Created by Macrovision in 1998, it was mainly used to protect CD-based PC games. Basically how it worked was that every single disk would come with a digital encrypted signature. And every time you would want to play the game, you have to insert the disk in your PC. And when you launch the game, it would check the disk for the encryption key in the background. And if everything was legit and accurate, then the game would launch. And if there was no disk or if the disk was pirated, then the game would crash. The SafeDisk signatures were designed in such a way that it was really hard to copy the game file from one disk to another. But this also didn't stop the hackers. What they did was created a no CD crack. What this crack does is it bypasses the whole disk authentication process. So once you put this crack file in the game folder, it would make the game believe that the disk is already inserted in the PC, and then the game would run normally without even inserting the disk. Big games like Call of Duty 2, Doom 3, Prince of Persia Sand of Time, Quake 4, Dynasty Warriors 6, Gears of War, all of which use SafeDisk protection, got cracked by different scene groups. And on top of this, SafeDisk also had a lot of issues. For example, people who genuinely bought the game had to wait at least 20 to 30 seconds every time before booting the game because the authentication took a really long time. SafeDisk also caused a lot of performance and security issues, mainly because it gets deeply embedded with the operating system. And after the release of Windows 10 in 2015, Microsoft announced that the games with SafeDisk DRM would just not run on the operating system anymore because it could work as a loophole for computer viruses to exploit. So yeah, turns out SafeDisk was actually not that safe after all. It was also around the time when people started using BitTorrent to pirate video games. Now, in case you don't know what torrent is, it is basically a peer-to-peer file sharing protocol. Or in simple words, what torrent does is instead of downloading the file from a single source or a single server, it downloads bits and pieces of the same file from all the other torrent users around the world. When downloading any file from torrent, there are mainly two important things that matters: seeds and peers. Seeds are the torrent users who already have the complete file and now they are just uploading it for others to download. And peers are all the people who are downloading that exact same file. When downloading something through torrent, you are taking small chunks of data from all the other torrent users to complete your download. And at the same time, you are also uploading the downloaded data from your computer so that others can download it from you as well. Hence the name peer-to-peer. This is basically the whole concept of torrent. And because the data is spread among all these users, it becomes nearly impossible to stop the piracy. Because once any form of media ends up on the torrent networks, there's just no way to take it down. Because as long as even one seeder exists, the file can be pirated. And because of this reason, torrent was becoming one of the core elements in piracy. Now, because stopping torrent was just not an option and SafeDisk was not actually that much safe, developers needed something more secure that could actually stop the hackers from cracking the games. And then we got Developed by Sony DADC, SecuROM became one of the most controversial DRMs of its time. What it basically did was it used multiple layers of protection, including digital encrypted signatures on every single disk. It had a limit on how many times you can activate and install a particular game, and it also required disk verification every single time you wanted to play a game. And on top of all this, SecuROM also constantly checked your system for any hardware changes. So if you had made any changes in your system, like changing your RAM, changing your CPU, or maybe upgrading your GPU, then the game would just stop working and you had to reactivate the game again. Which was a big issue because the games had limited amount of activations. Based on the data I found, someone could only activate a game 3 times. Yes, only 3 times before it just straight up stopped working. And if somebody had already used their 3 activation limit, then they had to contact the customer service to increase their limit. After using so many layers of protection, this surely must stop the hackers from cracking the games, right? Yeah, not really. Turns out, even though it used multiple layers of protection, it still couldn't stop the hackers. Games were still getting cracked. Really popular games like Fallout 3, Bioshock 1, Bioshock 2, GTA Vice City, GTA San Andreas, Resident Evil 5, Arkham Asylum, Batman Arkham City, Far Cry 2, and a lot of other games. What the hackers did was that they created keygens that could bypass the activation limit for each users. And with the combination of no CD cracks and keygens, they could bypass the whole authentication process. These scene groups would release these games as an ISO file which pirates can just simply extract and copy the crack file and then start playing it without any hassle. The pirates were enjoying the game without any issue, but it was the people who legitimately bought the games were the ones who were suffering. And things got really bad when EA released a game called Spore with SecuROM in 2008. You see, this game required an online authentication every 10 days, which the people didn't exactly like. I mean, online authentication every 10 days in 2008 was not something that everyone could do. Nowadays, internet is accessible and everyone has it, but back in the day, it was not that much accessible, and to connect a game every 10 days just so you can play it was a really big ask. And clearly, people didn't exactly like it. A class action lawsuit was filed against EA for including SecuROM in this game, and later on Spore became one of the most pirated game of 2008 with around 1.7 million downloads over torrent networks. The irony in this whole situation was that SecuROM was supposed to stop people from pirating this game, but in the end it became the very reason why people were choosing to pirate this game. It was clear that SecuROM was such a painful thing for the users that they instead chose to play a pirated copy. Now after Spore, there were still some games that came with SecuROM, but over the years developers slowly stopped using it in their games, mainly because it was still a lot easy for the hackers to crack, and it also caused a lot of issues on the legit users. And then later on, a bunch of SecuROM developers would go on to make another DRM, which we all know nowadays as Denuvo. And I will talk about it later in this video, but before that, we need to talk about another DRM that has caused a lot of nightmares among the gamers, known as Now, if you have ever played any game with StarForce DRM, then you would know why I am calling it a nightmare. Developed by StarForce Technologies, StarForce was also a DRM that used multiple layers of encryptions to protect the data. Anytime you would install a StarForce game, it would also install StarForce drivers into your PC without even your permission. And those drivers would stay in your PC even after you have uninstalled the game. And this was a huge issue. The main reason for all these drivers were because StarForce needed deep system level access, so that not only it could constantly check for all the game files of the game, but also take control of other aspects of your PC, including the disk drive, so that it could stop users from copying the game. And that caused a lot of major issues. The first issue was that disk drive in some cases would just stop working. And anytime you install a different disk, like for example a music CD, then the PC would just crash. Uninstalling the game did not uninstall the drivers, and that also caused a lot of performance and crash issues. For a lot of people, just even booting a StarForce game could cause the system to crash and show blue screen of death. And in some cases, just even booting the PC would cause the operating system to crash. It was so bad that StarForce themselves released a removal tool just to remove these drivers. As I said, it was a nightmare, and not only for the users, no, it was also a nightmare for the hackers. StarForce games like Splinter Cell Chaos Theory took more than 1 year to get cracked. Prince of Persia: The Two Thrones took around 9 months. You get the point. These were a really long time compared to the other DRMs. Clearly, StarForce was really hard to crack, but because StarForce had so many problems, people slowly started to boycott it. On March of 2006, the Warez Scene group Reloaded released a bunch of data on how StarForce 3 works, which also helped the others to reverse engineer and crack its protection.
Here is our little contribution to the reverse engineering community. No matter who you are, you can do whatever you want with this. We don't care.
And also the same year, a $5 million lawsuit was filed against Ubisoft for using StarForce in their games. And then later on, Ubisoft also stopped using StarForce and switched to SecuROM. By the year 2014, DRM methods like SecuROM and SafeDisk were either phased out or were just largely ineffective in stopping the piracy. And this was exactly when Denuvo entered the market. Denuvo DRM was developed by the Austrian company Denuvo Software Solutions. The company was formed from a management buyout of Digital Works, the developers of SecuROM. Yeah, that's SecuROM. Now, just like the other DRMs, Denuvo is also hated by a lot of gamers. Over the years, we have seen multiple examples where Denuvo-less versions of the same game ran way better compared to the version with Denuvo. Even recently, we have seen that the removal of Denuvo from Jedi Survivor has made the game run way better. I mean, you can clearly see that there is a noticeable difference between these two versions, although Denuvo themselves have claimed that it does not hinder gaming performance. Now, whether Denuvo actually harms the performance or not is a totally different discussion and is definitely debatable, but what Denuvo does really well is protect video games from getting cracked. How Denuvo actually works is really complex, but to put it simply, what it does is, while you are playing a game, it always keeps running in the background and constantly checks for any changes in the game files or your system hardware. And if it detects any changes, then it just stops the game from running. And that's why even when you're playing an offline game, you still need to occasionally connect to the internet every few days to verify your account and the game files, or else the game would just stop working. Denuvo literally changed the whole piracy scene. The first game to release with Denuvo was FIFA 15, released on 23rd of September 2014. And after the release, all the pirates were eagerly waiting for the crack to drop. 1 month passed by, nothing. 2 months passed by, nothing. 3 months, nothing. 4 months, nothing. Even after 6 months, there was no crack. Then the second game to release with Denuvo was Lords of the Fallen, which also remained uncracked even after months. Clearly, Denuvo was doing something. It had an effect in the scene because the games were not getting cracked. The third game to release with Denuvo was Dragon Age Inquisition, and this finally became the first game that actually got cracked. A Chinese hacker group known as 3DM somehow managed to bypass the Denuvo protection. It was the first time within months that any group had managed to bypass a Denuvo protected game. Then the second Denuvo protected game to get cracked was Lords of the Fallen, and it was cracked by the hacking group Piracy, and it took them around 9 months. Later on that same year, a bunch of other games slowly started to get cracked, including big games like Batman Arkham Knight, Battlefield Hardline, and FIFA 15. Even though Denuvo was getting cracked, it was slowly getting harder and harder, and games were also taking way longer to get cracked. On January of 2016, the Chinese hacker group 3DM said that in 2 years, there might be no more pirate games to play. And they also made a statement that they will not be cracking any more single-player games for a year. But even after this statement, for the next 2 years, cracks still kept coming, with Piracy being the group that cracked the most amount of Denuvo protected games between 2016 to 2017. But even other than Piracy, there were also other groups and individual crackers who were slowly cracking Denuvo protected games. Everyone was figuring out a new way to either crack or bypass Denuvo. For example, the group Steampunks figured out a way to bypass Denuvo by using keygens in games like Abzu, FIFA 17, Dishonored 2, and a lot of other big games. Whereas Voksi, a Bulgarian hacker, remember this name by the way, it will come up later, he used a loophole in the Doom demo to bypass the other Denuvo protected games like Just Cause 3, Rise of the Tomb Raider, and Inside. Although that loophole was fixed after a few days, but it was clear that Denuvo was slowly losing because games kept getting cracked. Especially the group Conspiracy was releasing multiple Denuvo protected games almost every single month. Between August of 2016 to August of 2017, Conspiracy released more than 25 different Denuvo games including DLCs and updates. Games were getting cracked just within days. Resident Evil 7 Biohazard only 5 days after its release. Mass Effect Andromeda only 10 days after its release. Total War Warhammer 2 and FIFA 18 both cracked by steampunks within 24 hours. Middle-earth Shadow of War cracked by Codex within 24 hours. These hacking groups also started collaborating with each other to crack games. As time went on, Denuvo was getting easier and easier to crack. The developers also slowly started to stop using Denuvo in their games. Denuvo needed to do something to stop the hackers, and to do that, it came up with an even stronger version, Denuvo version 4.8. And it kinda worked. Games like Sonic Forces and Assassin's Creed Origins, both of which came with this same version of Denuvo, remained uncracked for a really long time. Even though the group Conspiracy did manage to crack it eventually, it took them a really long time. On 23rd of January 2018, Denuvo was acquired by Irdeto, a software company based in Netherlands, and they claimed that they have combined Denuvo with their own security technology for even better protection. More and more games slowly started to come out with this version of Denuvo. Games like Dragon Ball FighterZ, Sword Art Online, Fatal Bullets, Final Fantasy XII The Zodiac Age, Puyo Tetris, how do you pronounce it?
Pew Pew Tetris.
Now because of this version, games were taking a lot longer compared to the older Denuvo titles. And suddenly the amount of cracks that were getting released by the scene groups dropped drastically. Around mid-2018, a Bulgarian hacker named Voksi, yep, that guy from earlier, started to crack games on a regular basis. Games with the latest version of Denuvo that stayed uncracked for a really long period of time were suddenly getting cracked within just days. Around February of 2018, Voksi also released a detailed video tutorial on cracking Denuvo. Voksi, in an interview with Torrentfreak, claimed that he cracked Injustice 2 within just 10 hours.
In the end, it might take some more testing and test cracks, but I'm very happy to announce that I won't stop until we are Denuvo cancer-free from all games.
Football Manager, Injustice 2, Dragon Ball FighterZ, a new game was getting cracked almost every single week. At one point, Voksi managed to crack a game with the latest version of Denuvo, version 4.9, just one day after its release. It seemed like Voksi figured out a way to crack even the latest versions of Denuvo. And as you might have guessed, it was clearly becoming a problem for Denuvo. And suddenly one day Voksi's website Revolt stopped working. Voksi made a post on Reddit saying that,
So, as many of you noticed, Revolt is down since yesterday and redirecting to some bull site. It finally happened. I can't say it wasn't expected. Denuvo filed a case against me to the Bulgarian authorities. Police came yesterday and took the server PC and my personal PC. I had to go to the police afterwards and explain myself. Later that day, I contacted Denuvo themselves and offered them a peaceful resolution to this problem. They can't say anything for sure yet, but they said the final word is by the prosecutor of my case. Sadly, I won't be able to do what I did anymore. I did what I did for you guys, and of course, because bloated software in our games shouldn't be allowed at all. Maybe someone else can continue my fight.
Yeah, so in simple words, he got caught by the authorities. And this news made everyone on the subreddit really sad. People started commenting things like,
Nothing to say. Thanks for everything. You will forever remain in our hearts. This kid outsmarted an entire company of engineers and all they could do to fight back was sue. I'll pirate anything they try to DRM until the day I die. So they couldn't make their protection stronger and instead filed a lawsuit. Stay classy, Denuvo. We are glad you are fine. Nothing is more important than yourself. Take care, man.
Around September of 2020, a huge bust happened in the scene. A huge group known as Sparks got caught by the authorities, which also caused a huge drop in pirate releases. As the news started to spread of this bust, a lot of different scene groups just straight up stopped releasing new game cracks. The group Darksiders in one of their NFOs said,
"Respect to all the groups and people that got affected. Let's hope many just hiding. Sadly, some groups and sites we won't see ever again."
As time went on, Denuvo got harder and harder to crack, and slowly popular cracking groups started to give up or just straight up retire. It was looking like Denuvo has finally managed to stop piracy. Until... When we talk about video game piracy, we have to talk about Empress, because at this current time, she is the only one capable enough to crack Denuvo protected games. She entered the scene under the name C000005. That's a lot of zeros. And she had a history of working with the group Codex. Over the years, she has cracked multiple games that came with either the latest versions of Denuvo or even games that use different kinds of multiple layered protection. Really popular games like Red Dead Redemption 2, Anno 1800, Planet Zoo, Mortal Kombat 11, Resident Evil Village, Immortal Phoenix Rising were all cracked by her. And in doing so, she also gained a lot of fan following. On September 24th of 2020, she made a post on the r/crackwatch subreddit saying that the scene has basically become dead silence and that joining the scene was a really big mistake for her, as the scene was basically delaying her cracks by months. And then in the end, she also asked for donations from all of her followers so that she could continue working on future cracks by herself. Now the thing about Empress was that her methods were very different. As you can already tell, she was doing things that was against the rule of the scene. Earlier in this video, I have already said that the scene works on certain rules, and one of them is that no one can ask for money for their cracks. But Empress was basically breaking all the rules. She was asking for donations from her fans. She would take votes on which games her fans wanted to be cracked next. And instead of popularity or glory, she said she was cracking games to preserve them. Everybody was loving her methods, and even though she was breaking the rules, the scene couldn't exactly do anything about it because Empress had all the power, because she was the only one cracking Denuvo. The group Darksiders in one of their NFOs said,
"Extra for Empress. As we do this without profit from own pockets, we supply them games, buy them. Empress, you are asking money for piracy. We think that's more rotten than Codex themselves. We also have our real-life jobs to do, and we would not ever ask money. Shame on you. For starters, piracy's basic principle is free. Also thing is you are calling scene toxic just cause we're on one biggest groups. We are really chilled and let people do things on their own pace. Most of sceners are a bit angry at the fact that Codex uses money for crackers. Scene, don't do that usually."
Now in reply, Empress said that she does not care about scene and their competition. She only cracks games to preserve them, and this mission of her requires financial support. She also criticized scene groups for being lazy because they are chill and do nothing. In February of 2021, she did an interview with Wired where she talked about herself, her motivations, and how she started cracking games. If you want, you can also read the complete article. I will give the link in the description, but to summarize, when asked what got her into breaking DRMs, she says,
"It was a dream she had one night in 2014. Chains made up of numbers wrapped around the video game Dark Souls 2. It was anti-piracy software, she realized. As she focused, she began to see what every number meant universally," she says. Turning deeper inward, she says, "She soon entered the zone, which allows me to see more into everything. The chains broke."
I honestly have no clue what I'm reading right now, but that's what she said. She also said,
"I have a goal that no one else has," she says. "I have no need for ego. I think the main problem is that people fail to see video games as the pinnacle and max potential of art.
Recently, she cracked Anno 1800, which layered 3 types of protection Denuvo on top.
No one else does this because it requires insane amount of focus, dedication, and endless passion. I was able to achieve this only in several months of research. It was hell, to say the least.
It seemed like Empress had her own ethics, and she didn't care about anything other than cracking video games. But things were about to go downhill. Empress was the only one cracking Denuvo. She had all the power, and no matter what she did, her fans would always come to her for cracked video games, and she slowly started to abuse her power. On February of 2021, she released a crack for Immortal Phoenix Rising. But what she also did was capped the download speed of this crack so that it would at least take 24 hours for someone to completely download it. And why she did it? To stop the repackers from repacking the game. Now, in case you don't know what repacking is, let me explain. So video games are basically really huge, and depending on the game it can range from 50 gigabytes to even more than 100 gigabytes. I'm looking at you, Call of Duty. And downloading this much data from torrent is extremely time consuming, mainly because torrents are not usually that fast. Now, to solve this issue, there are some people who take the cracked complete game file and then compress it to a much smaller size, and then they release it on their own websites as repacks. And because the size is much smaller, the download will also be much faster. Typically, when a new game gets cracked, the pirates don't usually download it from the direct source, but they rather wait for a trusted repacker to repack the complete game so that they can download it quicker. There are a bunch of repackers on the internet, FitGirl and Dodie being the most popular ones that most pirates trust. Although I would recommend you guys not to visit these sites because there are a lot of clone variants of the same websites made by hackers, and downloading something from those clone sites could literally harm your PC and leak your personal information. So please be very careful on the internet and don't do anything stupid. Anyway, now because Empress limited the download speed on her crack, no repacker could download it quicker and then release it on their websites for the other pirates. You see, Empress did it because she wanted everyone to download it from her own source rather than some repacker. She wanted everyone to know that Empress is the one giving them these games, not any repacker or anyone else. She wanted all the credit, she wanted all the recognition and all the glory, and this was totally against her own ethics, and people got mad. FitGirl, who is basically one of the biggest repackers on the internet, released a statement saying that from now on, she will never make any repacks of Empress games.
Empress intentionally limited the uploading speed of her seed box to 200 kilobytes per second, and feeding the same chunks to the crowd, so no one would download the ISO before others. So almost 24 hours after release, not a single person but her has the access to the said crack. And why did she do it, you ask? The answer is mind-blowing. She hates all repackers for stealing the spotlight from her work. It's against common logic and piracy ethics. Well, your wish will be granted, dear Empress. I will never make any repacks with your cracks again. I don't want to be related to the toxicity you've created with your last statements and actions. Enjoy your spotlight, Empress.
Later on, Empress also straight up started asking for money. She asked for a total of $500 if her fans wanted her to crack a game of their choice. This also made a lot of people angry. Asking for donations was acceptable, but asking for straight up $500 for a cracked game was too much. She also used to share her controversial philosophical views among her followers. She would make really sensitive homophobic and racist comments about different people. And at one point she also said a lot of bad things about Indians, and all of this was making her followers even more angry. The very people that followed her and trusted her were now calling her crazy and unstable, that she has mental issues. She used to have her own subreddit which also got banned mainly because of her inappropriate comments and statements. She created her own Telegram group which currently has thousands of followers. And this is where she now shares her cracks, her philosophical views and comments basically. On February 24th of 2021, she made a Reddit post saying that she got caught by the police red-handed and within an hour she will be dragged out of her home. And she blamed FitGirl and her followers for leaking her information. But people didn't exactly took it seriously. It was looking more like a publicity stunt or an attempt to turn people against Fit Girl. People started to point out all the loopholes in the statement, like if she got caught red-handed, then why is she making a Reddit post? How did she know that police is gonna come to her house within an hour? And if she has time, why isn't she removing the evidence? There were a lot of things that just seemed really shady. But after a few days, she made another post saying that police investigation has ended and she's going to be okay. And after seeing this post, people again started making really funny comments. Now, even though she was doing these crazy stunts and making so many inappropriate comments, the one thing that she was serious about was cracking video games. When Hogwarts Legacy got released with the latest and the strongest version of the Denuvo at that time, Empress claimed that she could crack it within just 10 days, which was a really big claim. Now, although she couldn't crack it within exactly 10 days, it took her just a few more days, but she did manage to crack it. And this was a big deal. She managed to crack the latest version of Denuvo within just over 12 days. But in the NFO file of the Hogwarts Legacy crack, Empress again made a lot of bad comments, which was also really controversial, which again made a lot of people angry. After Hogwarts Legacy, she cracked more Denuvo games like Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Dead Island 2, Resident Evil 4 Remake. But in the NFO file of these games, she again made a lot of really aggressive and hurtful comments that again made people really angry. She even directly said a lot of things to Denuvo, saying that their protection is a joke and that they can't stop her. Now, as I said before, Empress's whole ego or power came from the fact that she was the only one who could crack Denuvo. So on August of 2023, when Skid Row released a crack for a game called Effie, which had Denuvo, that also caused a lot of chaos. It was the first time in a really long time that someone other than Empress had managed to crack Denuvo. Pirates saw it as a hope that someone other than Empress will now crack more Denuvo protected games. But Empress was not exactly happy with it. So in the NFO of her judgment crack, she called out to Skid Row saying that they did not actually crack Denuvo, but rather used a loophole in the Unity engine.
All you did was exploit Unity Engine's backend using mono to restore some generic code in assembly C#.dll. You never touched the actual Denuvo and never devirtualized a single byte in your pathetic life.
And as you can already guess, in return, Skid Row also released a long statement replying to Empress. Now, I'm not gonna read the entire thing because there are a lot of vulgar and inappropriate words, but to summarize, Skid Row criticized Empress and replied to all her accusations. But the biggest twist was that Skid Row revealed Empress's real identity. They claimed that Empress in reality is actually, wait for it, Empress is Voksi. Bet you didn't see that coming, huh? See, I told you the piracy lore is crazy. Now, of course, there are not any actual evidence to this statement, and later on Voksi himself made a post declining all these claims. But this statement also caused a lot of chaos in the piracy world. It seemed like there was always a new controversy or some sort of new drama surrounding Empress. In her Telegram group, at one point she even started her own cult and asked for money from her followers who wanted to join that cult. On July 19th of 2024, she made a long post on her Telegram group saying that she is now working on her own MMO game and that she will integrate most of her Telegram activities inside that game. There will also be a ranking system, and later she also said that, and I quote,
"Forget about Denuvo games. This will be your new long-sticking addiction, not only because it will be the most realistic and engaging way of interactions between everyone, but also because you will finally get a legit way to learn some real reverse engineering from me directly inside the game. I will be making periodic lessons from time to time available to those with certain ranks and pass certain conditions, so naturally only the best will get such honor, as it should be."
That's pretty much what's happening with Empress. And as of now, while I'm making this video, her last post was on September 15th, where she posted a link of a YouTube music video. When will she crack a new game again? Well, that nobody exactly knows. So, now the question is, what's now the current situation of all the popular scene groups. When we talk about conspiracy, nobody exactly knows what happened to them. They were once one of the top Denuvo crackers who cracked the highest amount of Denuvo protected games. But after a while, they just stopped releasing any more cracks. They probably retired because of no competition, or maybe they just got caught by the authorities. Now, as I already said before, scene groups are really anonymous and nobody exactly knows what's going on in the scene from the outside. Next, the group Codex made a post in 2022 saying that they were retiring from the scene. The Bulgarian hacker Voksi got caught by the authorities. The group Steampunks mainly used to use keygens to bypass Denuvo, but that trick just doesn't work anymore, so they also slowly faded away with time. Nobody knows what happened to them. Just like this, there are a lot of other groups that has now just stopped cracking new games or haven't cracked a game in a really long time. And usually in the scene, when something like this happens, it either means the group has retired or disbanded, or they got caught by the authorities. But that doesn't mean every group is dead. As of now, there are still a lot of different groups that exist and crack new games. Although none of them are cracking the latest versions of Denuvo. Most of these groups only crack games with lower level protection or easier DRMs. And as of Empress, nobody has any idea when she will be back. Okay, so that was somewhat a complete history of video game piracy. Now I know I have definitely missed a lot of small details and data in between. Piracy in itself is a really controversial topic to discuss, and a lot of the data about these topics are either removed or just never gets documented. For example, the data of all the Denuvo protected games used to exist on Wikipedia, but later on for some reason it got removed, so I had to use Wayback Time Machine to gather those older informations. But still, I tried to gather as much data as I could for this particular video, and I really hope that you enjoyed it. Before ending this video, I just want to talk a little bit about all the sources that I used in this video. Most of the data I got from Reddit, Wikipedia, and a lot of websites that documented these events at that time. And I have linked all the sources in the description, so if you want to learn more about these topics, you can check the description. There is literally a huge Reddit post talking about Empress, so if you want to learn more about her, you can check that out. And again, thanks for watching. If you're still in the video, then thank you so much for staying till the end. It took a really long time to make this video, so much research and so much editing, and it literally, honestly, it just took way too long than I was expecting it to, but finally it's done. And if you enjoyed, please consider sharing with your friends, maybe dropping a like, and if you're new, please consider subscribing. Yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.